Welcome to the Stressless Eating Podcast, where we help diet-obsessed and food-crazed women break themselves out of the food and body prison, end the dieting madness, and take control of their health for good. I'm your host, Leanne Ellington, and this podcast is about answering one question. How can you heal your relationship with food and your body and take a practical approach to this whole self-love journey, but without all that restriction, obsession, and shame, and without needing years of therapy to do so? If you want to know the answer, you're in the right place. All this information is 100% free, so please subscribe to and review our podcast. Hello and welcome to today's episode. We are here. We're back for What's God Got to Do With It Part 2. And I'm here with two very special humans, Kevin and Rea Queen, who you heard about in Part 1 of What's God Got to Do With It, which we will link in the show notes. And we are going to dive in. But before we do that, just a quick kind of reiteration that from the first episode, this is for anyone here. This is not a conversation about religion or right or wrong or good, bad, should, shouldn't. This is a conversation about faith and possibility. And we just, we're inviting you into this with open ears and an open mind and an open heart. And if all you do is take away one little nugget from this, it would please all of us. And we just want you to receive whatever you're here to receive, in good faith that you will. So first of all, say hello to our listeners.
And I'm Kevin, and it's so good. It's so good to be with you, and I'm excited to be with Rea and be able to just talk through story and share. We love listening to Part 1, listen to you share your story, and love that we got the invite to be a part of Part 2. So.
Hey everybody, this is Rea, and we're just excited to be here. Love Leanne, love what she stands for, love her story, love her faith, love just the light that exudes from her. And so I believe that we're going to even get to hear some of that through this podcast. So excited to hear what's going to come.
Awesome. Yeah. And we don't have a plan here, guys. We are just totally speaking from the heart and letting the words come through us. So what I think is a great place to kick off with is just to kind of bridge from Part 1 where, I shared my faith story about how really it was an invitation. I was like the biggest cynic of them all, the biggest skeptic. I didn't grow up with God, didn't even know that I didn't have God. And I happened to walk through the doors of Crosspoint where you are the head pastor. And, just that invitation, the music, it soaked into my bones and really moved me. And then your words, and I never knew that church or anything like that could be experienced like that. And, I shared how at first the word Jesus was a little bit uncomfortable for me. And just, I kind of replaced it with universe or energy or God and just listened to the words. And when I met you and when I eventually met you, Rea, just like how open-minded you were. You weren't there trying to make me see what I wasn't ready to see. You were just so excited that I was there. And so for anybody who is listening here and they might be in a similar spot where they're like, and by the way, this is coming from a place of after episode 1 got released, I've gotten so many emails and messages of people that are in that kind of in between of like, hey, I want to believe in something bigger, but people are coming from a couple different camps. Like maybe they got indoctrinated into some sort of like punishment based God or shame based God that's mad at them, or like, got something shoved down their throat that they weren't ready for, or just never got exposed to it and had some kind of misconception about what it could be in their life. So if anybody's in that in-between space, but also the people that do have God and that are ready for some new revelation and want to experience a deeper version of God, but also of themselves, of self-love, which is really what we're going to get into later in the episode. What would you say to anybody that's in that space that to invite them into a conversation? What would you share with them?
That's a great question. I think we're all in process. Like we're all in a journey to get to know God. He is infinite. And so we should all feel a little bit like kindergartners, right? And at the same time, that relationship. And it reminds me of something where Jesus said, he's like, if you want to step into the kingdom, if you want to have this relationship with God, you got to have faith like a child. Mm-hmm. And I think there's something so pure about that God meets us right where we're at. And he meets us in our questions, in our longings, in our uncertainties, and he wants us to bring that to him. And so we're all in a journey, and we're all in. I think the line in coming after God, like it is one deep, And so he invites us to just all come right where we're at and come to him. And it's been so fun to watch your process and to watch your journey and your questions and the wonderings and just the wonder that you have about who God is, and bring in your history of what you were brought up in and the beauty of that, and to bring that to go, okay, how does Jesus fit? And I've loved that. And I know as a pastor, like, we're not supposed to have favorites, but I remember, like, after I talked with you that first day and came home and I told Ree, the story, and told her a little bit about it, and I was like, I love your pursuit. And so it's just been amazing to watch you journey along the way. And God is so patient. Mm-hmm. Like, he is so patient with us, and it's because his heart, he wants everybody to know him. Mm-hmm. He's not slow in keeping his promise, but he's patient because he wants everyone to know that life-giving relationship that he desires. So
absolutely. Oh.
Well, you about said it all, Kev. But when you said the pursuit, I think that is kind of one of the keys, that it's a never-ending pursuit, which is what you really want, because you don't want to ever feel like you've arrived. And it's okay that you haven't arrived, because you never will. But it's just the pursuit. It's the daily new revelations, or the new ways to see things, a new perspective. So yeah, I think that's an important part, that pursuit, never stop that pursuit, and be okay that you're never stopping that pursuit. It's a beautiful thing. So.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that kind of like turned me on to God, is like, oh, I get to have a relationship and a never-ending conversation, and there's no like right or wrong way to do it. And I think a lot of people think there is a right or wrong way to do it, so they don't want to try, because you don't want to make God mad. I mean, who wants to make God mad, And I hear about a lot of people that have had a relationship with God, and they've kind of taken a step back because they think they've done something wrong. And it's like a child that feels shameful to go home after they, stayed out past their curfew or whatever it is, but not the best metaphor, but you get the point, right? And so, this idea of God always meeting you where you are, like what you just said, it's one of the things that I look for in human relationships. Like, I always want to be met where I am. So if you were to speak to people that maybe have had some sort of like falling out with themselves, and here's where I want to bring up shame. Because shame is just, first of all, one of the most toxic experiences and emotions that we experience, because what typically comes alongside shame is secrecy and isolation. And then there's that shame about the shame, which we've talked about, which is, we don't want anybody to know. So we put on this happy face, And so, if anybody has fallen out, so I want to say, like, there's two camps, like people that have fallen out of grace, I'll call it, in their minds with God, and they feel like they can't go back, or they can't start over. It's not this ever evolving conversation, or people that maybe don't have even God in the conversation, but they've fallen out with themselves. All that self-loathing, that self-rejection, that shame, that criticism, and it's part of the human experience. But to a lot of people, it's their emotional home. So in terms of God meeting you where you are, like, what would you say to people that are experiencing that or in that space?
I think it's helpful for us to realize that, like, this is part of the human story. I mean, it goes all the way back to the garden. Whether you understand that story as a metaphor, or you understand the story as, well, there was really an Adam and Eve, and that's where things started. But when we look at that story, Adam and Eve, they bought into a lie. And so that was the first thing, is like, is God really love you? Is God really withholding? Is God really caring for you? And so they bought into this lie, and then they sin. And from that sin, they feel a sense of shame. And they brought that shame on, and they hid themselves. And it says they used to walk with God in the cool of the day. Like, we were built for relationships with one another, and we were built for a relationship with God. But what happens is, after sin causes us to feel shame, and then shame causes us to hide. It's the reason back when I was trying to eat like paleo and like being strict paleo, when I went to McDonald's and I got McDonald's, it's why I threw the receipt away before I went in the house. I was like, I don't want Rita to see the receipt. Like, there's this, I feel shame. I gotta hide. And God is just so beautiful in the story. God walks and he looks for Adam and Eve, and he says, "Where are you?" And it's the heart of the Father saying, "I miss you." Not where are you at on the planet, but where are we at in this relationship? Yeah. Why is there this distance here? Yeah. And they say, well, we're here. And then they were trying to cover up. And so they were using, leaves and stuff to try to cover up. And God's like, who told you that you were naked? Like, there's a sense of shame that they have. They want to hide. And that's what shame causes. And God created clothes for them. And it says that there was a sacrifice that he sacrificed. He sacrificed an animal to create cover, because sin always requires sacrifice. And God took it on himself to cover over their shame. And that's the love of a father. Yeah. Saying, I'm gonna cover over that. You don't have to carry that anymore. Yeah. Like, you can let it and come out from hiding. Yeah. And let me, because we can't receive love when we're hiding. Yeah. We have to come out from hiding, and we can't be healed when we're hiding. Yeah. Like, what we conceal can't be healed. Absolutely. But when we reveal it, we're like, here's what I'm struggling with. Just even the power of conversation. This is what I'm struggling with. When somebody says that, well, then they can find healing and then find wholeness. So that's how we break toxic shame. Yeah. That's how we break toxic shame, is that we have to have somewhere we put it. We have to have that conversation. And Jesus, there's so many conversations. If you look at Jesus, Jesus said, if you want to see what God looks like, look at me. Yeah. In other words, if you want to see the Father, look at me. And when you look at Jesus, you see the way he responds to people's shame. And it is, that's the beauty of the Gospels, is that he comes and he takes their shame on himself, and he removes their shame, and he loves the shame off of them.
Yeah, honestly, that is one of the reasons that I came to God. I was just like, I can't do this anymore. Like, there's something I can't, you use 3 words: reveal, conceal, and heal. And Leanne likes to rhyme. But like, it's one of those things where it's just like, I can't do this on my own. And that was the big voice of surrender for me. The theme of this first episode was the surrender conversation, and it's still ongoing. Anytime I'm feeling all the feels, I'm like, oh, not surrendering. Where do I need to surrender? And I think that's what it is like this conversation of like not trying to do it on our own. And I want us to talk about that, because, I think a lot of us have this badge of honor of like, oh, and I know for me, I was like, so I've been into personal development and personal growth for a decade at least, and realizing like, no, I can't personal growth my way through this. There is something like, I need to be a child of God. And that is a hard hat to put on when you pride yourself as being, #adulting and like doing all the things and, hustling for your worthiness and trying to be successful and happy and all the things, right? But there's this element, like there's only so much you can do as a human, right? And then even that, though, is amplified when you allow yourself to surrender to this bigger conversation. So again, for people who have this conversation and people who don't, in terms of this idea of like, if anybody out here is listening, they're like, man, I'm still trying to like out mindset this, or I'm still trying to like personal growth my way to self-love. And we're going to talk about self-love specifically, but what would you say to this concept of like surrendering and not being alone in this world, and allowing this idea, just even trying on this idea of like, you don't have to carry around this shame. Like, somebody's here to take it from you.
Yeah. I think when you use that word surrender, it is a daily process. It is a daily, because it is our nature to want to carry those things and try to, and I think we wear ourselves out when we stuff it down. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. Yeah. And I think a lot of times we feel depression because we're trying to suppress the sadness, and we're trying to suppress the angst, and we're trying to suppress the anxiety, and we're trying to suppress that shame. And the beauty of the stories is that daily surrender. I'm not going to suppress this. A friend of mine, Chip, he said, you feel the feelings, then you tell yourself the truth, and then you embrace life on life's terms. And so I think part of it going, okay, I'm going to feel these feelings, because the feelings are real, but what's even more real is the truth. And so I've got to go and say, okay, what is the truth about what God thinks about me? What is the truth about what God is doing? What are his promises? Like, I'm going back to what is truth. And and the last is embrace life on life's terms. We're dealing with reality. Like, we live in a broken world, a tragic place, but yet we have hope because we have that truth. And I watch Rea, daily orient her life. Like, she gets up and she spends that time. I can see her, in the dining room, and she's sitting at that table, and she's she's orienting her life around that truth, because she's like, I'm going to start my day with what is most true. And so I see that daily process of surrender, and she's writing her prayers out in her journal, and she's processing those with the Lord, ordering life on truth, and then embracing the day from a posture of strength and surrender.
I have a question for you specifically, just to kind of stack on that. Because as he was saying, like, what does God say about you? Like, what are God's promises for you? Like, I have some sort of idea, but in my mind, I was like, what? What does he say? So for anyone who has never had this conversation and has never heard God's truth, like, what would you say to anybody listening? Like, what do you know to be true? What does God say about them? What are the promises that we speak of? And you can be, general, but like this love of the Father, like, what is that? Because again, in a way, we're bringing it back to like, are you smarter than a fifth grader? Like, 101, because this is the kind of stuff you said. I had all these curiosities and questions because it's like, wait a minute. It's this conceptual thing that I never tried on. And once I tried it on, I was like, wow, like the freedom, the liberation, the love, right? So this is me selfishly asking for myself for continued clarity on this. But I can imagine anybody who's never had this idea of like, what does God say about you? Can you just speak to that?
Yeah. Well, he says lots and lots of things. I'll be honest, right now, there is a verse in Psalm 23:1, and it's funny enough, Psalm 23 was the very first passage of scripture I ever memorized back when I was probably, 8 or 9. And I memorized it in the King James Version, but that's neither here nor there. But it says, this is not the King James Version. It says, the Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. And so for me right now, that is a promise that I am clinging to and believing and almost is a tidal wave of all his other promises to me. Because when I feel that, let's just take shame or confusion or chaos instead of peace, I say, the Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. And so when I say, gosh, I am not feeling peace, I just look to the Prince of Peace, and he has that, he is that, and he can give it to me. So anything, any moment where I'm feeling lack somewhere, I just say to the Lord, I'm feeling lack here, like give that to me, anything. Health. Name something. And he fills that gap. And he actually doesn't just fill the gap. He pours and overflows till it's running over. And then guess what? I can actually give that to somebody else.
Wow.
So,
you can't fill from an empty cup, And I think one of the themes that just came throughout what you were just saying is like, you go to him and you ask for it. It's like so many people feel ashamed to like ask for what they need and ask for love and ask for, sometimes we need validation. We need recognition. We need all these things, and we shame ourselves for needing it. And it's like, no, that's the human need. You know what I mean? Yes. And by golly, we can actually count on the fact that we can't provide that for ourselves, So coming back to this idea of self-love, because really, this podcast is here for, we meet in the conversation of women are diet obsessed and food in a food and body and shame prison, but it's so much deeper than that. It's this emotional home. It's a shame prison. And it's being comforted and numbed out by other things. But really it's this hole, for lack of a better way of saying it, that they don't see within themselves. And it's it's a heart thing. It's a gap emotionally. It's also, obviously there's a way of thinking that has been indoctrinated through society and all that, hence the need to throw out the receipt in the drive-through. But, so it's really about that, but the self-love conversation. And we were talking about this, and I'll just kind of share this right now quickly. We've done an episode, 5 ingredients of self-imaging on this podcast. And those 5 ingredients I created maybe, 10 years ago. And I was always like, yes, like this is it. And I still believe wholeheartedly, like this is it, And I had a conversation with our friend Kettrick, and he said to me very bluntly, he's like, Leanne, like you're still assuming this is just all on you. Like when are you, and this is before I had really like surrendered to God, And he's like, when are you going to let like God help you with some of this, And so, just to kind of speak to these ingredients, self-esteem, I call it the know, like, trust factor. Like, so many women do not trust themselves. They don't know themselves or like themselves, but really they've fallen out of trust with themselves because they've witnessed themselves time and time again making promises and breaking them, or, not following through, and then believing themselves less and less every single time they go to say, like, hey, this time's going to be different. Self-acceptance is accepting, like, where you are and who you are and what is, like, the reality of where you are, but without all that shame, without all that blame and self-condemnation. But the other side of self-acceptance is, I believe you're allowed to go say, you know what, there's ways of being that I no longer want to accept, and I want to surrender to something better. And you're allowed to want to up level, because I think in especially in the wellness world, like, and in the health world, a lot of people are shamed for wanting to shift their body. And, like, you know what, if being healthier and happy will make you a better version of yourself, I say go get them, tiger. But, not at the expense of your health and happiness. But that's the kind of fine line between self-acceptance. And then self-care, which people think it's a food and fitness thing. It's like, no, what does it look like for you to take care of yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, spiritually, all of that? Because when you leave any of those on the table, it's a recipe for disaster. And then we have self-worth. So what are you weighing and what are you measuring? Is your self-worth coming from the number on the scale, your jean size, how many likes you got on Instagram? Because if so, like, you are left vulnerable to all of the third-party opinions, and, the love of self is like fleeting from you, and then the last one is self-endorsement, where it's not like it's human for us to need connection, and it's not actually possible for us to be like, oh, I don't care what other people think about us, right? But what is possible is for us to care what we think about ourselves, even just as much as other people, and so these are the 5 ingredients that I talk about. It's a big part of my curriculum. But again, that conversation where it was just like, well, that's great, and it's all true, but, like, what if it was this incomplete truth? Like, what if there was this frame that goes around all of it that really encompasses self-love? So that's what I'd love to speak about. Like, what is the godly version of self-love, including those ingredients and all of that good stuff?
I'd like to tell a little story of, when my kids were little, we would I'd put them to bed, and I would pray a prayer, kind of the same prayer every night, and I would pray them. I call it praying around the bases. Like, if you imagine, like, the baseball diamond, and at home plate, I pray that you would love God. First base, that you would love yourself. Second base, that you would love others. And third base, that you would love what you do. And I think, just like in baseball, it's important that we run the bases the right way. When you run a third first, you're out. Right. And so many people, they run a third base first in life. And I had a mentor, Kevin Myers, who shared that with me. He's like, we can't run to third base first. And so many people try to find their fulfillment and their satisfaction in their purpose of what they do in the world rather than home plate, that relationship with God. So it begins with loving God and receiving. Because when we love God, we open ourselves up to receive His love. It's not that we first love Him. He's already loving us. But there's something that happens that you've experienced it firsthand, that when you love Him, and then we receive His love, and we actually have love to give ourselves.
Can you say more about the receiving part, please? I think that is the big thing, is, like, for women feeling worthy and feeling able to receive love from humans, but let alone God. Like, that might feel like an alternate universe in a foreign language. Can you just say more about that?
Yeah. So when I think about receiving the love of God, there's a scripture in Isaiah. It says, "In repentance and rest is your salvation, and quietness and trust is your strength." And what that verse talks about is that repentance. The word repentance means to just come home. Just come back home. Come back home to where you were made to be. Jesus told a story about one time about 2 sons. A father had 2 sons, and one son went off, squandered his inheritance, and the other son stayed at home. And when the son who was spent everything found himself tending pigs on a pig farm, and he came back home, and the father went out and he said, "My boy who was dead is now alive. My son who was lost is now found." He said, "Kill the fatted calf. Let's have a barbecue. Let's get some sweet tea, in the South." And just like, we're gonna celebrate. He wanted us to see that that's the Father's heart. Yes. That when we come home, and we come home every day, like, it's returning to God every single day. We come home when we wake up. We get back to that place of centeredness and go, God, to receive His love. So I receive His love in quietness. I receive His love in sitting still. I'm not in trying to earn it, trying to perform it. That's when I said I receive His love when it's like a car. It's hard to fill a car up with fuel when it's driving around. You got to go use it. And so many of us, we're driving around the gas station going, I got to get filled up. Guys, will you just sit still so that I can just love you? I receive love when I pay attention. When I pay attention, whether it's in his word or whether it's in worship, music, and song, and truth. I receive his love when in those moments when I don't, because I can confuse myself to think I'm doing something to earn it. So it's in those times when I just said, and when I worship him, whether it's through song or whether it's through scripture, whether it's through prayer, whether it's most of those times when God, I just love you. I just feel his love just poured out in my heart like liquid love. Like just that he fills up my heart. But it's more than a feeling. But sometimes I feel it. Right? I love them.
Absolutely.
Sometimes I feel it. So
and so what would you speak to about the self-love conversation, coming from your role, even as a mother, like all of the things, as a woman, just anything that comes on your heart right now about this self-love piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, this is a good conversation because we have 2 daughters and 2 sons, but sometimes it seems like just in the world that we live in, the idea of you are enough kind of plays out a little bit more with girls. But the truth of the matter is, where I have to start is who is God, who he is, and then who does he say that I am? Honestly, practically, I brought my journal, one of my journals, but honestly, practically, it is a daily thing where I just have to sit quietly. That's when Kevin said, in quietness is when I really can kind of tune into what God's saying, and that's the truth. I just have to sit quietly, and sometimes it's like just thoughts come to my head like, I am really feeling sad today. Why am I feeling so sad? And just begin to write like, who are you, God, in that sadness? And then the scriptures will pop in my head, or just truths about who God is. He is, he's like a father. He covers us with his wings, whatever it may be. And so I think bottom line for me and from what we're teaching our girls is you got to know who God is, and then you can know who you are and be able to love yourself because of the way that he loves you.
This whole conversation, I got goosebumps 3 different times, but it really is this opportunity to have a new mirror in front of you. That's what it was for me, because when you are so accustomed to looking in the mirror and just seeing whatever story you picked up about yourself, like of the world and just being, indoctrinated into society standards and all of that. We could do a whole episode about that alone, but it's like, what would happen if you had this new mirror that looked back at you and just said, I don't care what you weigh. You are not your weight. I don't care what you've done. You are not your shame, and just try. And that's why I keep saying, like, try it on, because anyone who's listening is like, oh, I did that before. It's like, well, you're not the same person you were the last time you tried it on. What if you try it on with new eyes and you look into a new mirror? And that's what my invitation is to anyone, is just like, try on a new mirror. And look through the eyes of the Father, of God, and just see what you look like. What would you look like without that shame and that condemnation? What would you look like if you saw yourself through this beautiful, powerful, confident lens? Because chances are the people that love you see you through that anyways, So one of the things that we were talking about earlier, and I'd love for you guys to speak to this, I talk to a lot of women specifically, again, like a lot of women think I have a food problem, I have a body problem, I have a, self-sabotage problem. And I show them like, no, it's twofold. Like, first of all, it's a system of thinking that you learn. Like, it's this eat less, move more, mentality that like even the most willpower driven woman couldn't sustain. Right. So it's a broken lens. It's a broken model. You need like a new system of thinking around that. But also it's the stories and the self-image and your identity, because like I could give any woman, my stressless eating strategy, but if they don't identify all the weeds in the garden of their mind that are tearing them down and causing them to think and act and feel and behave like they're unlovable, like they'll end up right back where they are right now, because again, it's not a food thing, right? So coming back to this conversation of God, I was sharing with you that the 2 kind of places that I hear now that the first episode was out, it's unlocked a lot of, bigger conversations, which is so cool. But one camp is like a women that they feel like God is mad at them because they haven't, figured this problem out yet, or because of the shame, or they have shame that they have shame because they know that, that they shouldn't be, air quotes, shouldn't be carrying that anymore. And so there's that side of it where they just feel like a disappointment, and it's just an added level of shame and disconnection from God. And then there's a separate, conversation that I hear a lot of, like, being mad at God, of like, God, you're supposed to have like helped me heal this by now. Like, I believed in you. I trusted you. I put my faith that you were just going to heal it. And, the way I describe it is like, disordered eating and the self-image and body image that comes alongside it. It's like a cancer. Like, it's got to get cut out. It doesn't get better on its own. It's got to be, addressed and healed, but there is that piece of the puzzle for some women. They're like, mad at God for not having healed it. So for anybody, like, again, coming back to the problem that this podcast is really about, and like the inner relation with God and trust and faith. And then I definitely want to talk about miracles because you know how I feel about them. But what would you all say about that?
Can I tell a story?
Of course.
Okay. So there was one time where like the religious leaders, they tried to trap Jesus, and they tried to put him in this situation that he couldn't get out of. They actually found a woman that had been caught in adultery, and they brought her before. And under the law back then, it would have cost her life. And so they all had rocks ready to stone her and ready to take her life. And they basically asked Jesus, what should we do? And should we follow the law, or should we? And so they were trying to trap him. And Jesus, it's just brilliant. He said, well, how about whichever one of you has not sinned, you throw the first stone. And it says that, I got to imagine this woman who was caught in adultery, like she was standing there. Imagine she's surrounded by all these accusers, and she's just feeling this shame. And it says that when they first came to him, it said that Jesus left this out, but he said he knelt down and he started to write in the sand. Now, we don't know what he wrote in the sand, but I think the beauty of it is that when somebody's writing in the sand, you look to see what they're writing in the sand. And so I think he did that in that moment to take the attention off this woman that's probably scantily clothed, to take the attention off of her and to bring the attention on himself. Yeah. And so he writes in the sand, and then he stands up and he says that. And it says that from the oldest to the youngest, they all dropped their stone. I think like the youngest, like the ones who maybe had the most self-righteous, the older realized, okay, he got us. And they dropped their stone and they all walked away. And then Jesus asked her, he says, where are your accusers? They left. But what got me with that story, one of the things that got me is the only person who was there without sin, the only person who could throw a stone didn't. Mm-hmm. He didn't. Yeah. And he took her shame and he loved her. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then he said, now go and sin no more. Like, you're free. Yeah. Like, you don't have to live this way anymore. You're free. And so I think like to realize that that's the way, if we think that God is dealing out shame, mm-hmm. if we think that shame, that condemnation, the guilt, if we think that's from God, we got to realize that's Jesus. Jesus said, if you want to see what the Father looks like, look at me. And so he came to reveal to us who God is and how God responds to our shame. And what does he do? Well, he writes something in the sand. So I'll be, okay, what does he write? Like, he's taking that shame, taking the attention, the shame off so that we can be free. Yeah. And it starts from that place of realizing that's how God feels. My boys are wrestling now. And it's so much fun. Rea is like, she's the wrestling mom. She's like doing all the moves. She's yelling. This is great. I just love watching her try to do the moves, sitting in the bleachers, like going. She is contorting, like she's like. But it's so much fun watching them and watching Rea watch them. But when they get done, one of my favorite things to say to them is something I heard that Olympic wrestlers. The Olympians, that they wanted to hear most from their parents, that they appreciated most. And I read a little article and study, and they said the thing that they remember their parents saying that they love is, I love to watch you play. Mm. Yeah. And I just, as I've been saying that, my boys, it's not, hey, you did great, you won, you lost. It's just, I love to watch you play. Yeah. And what that does, even with a loss, like, when my son's lost, but when I say I love to watch you play, it just loves the shame off. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so we realize we have a God who loves to watch us play. He loves to watch us live. He loves, like he looks on us with love. And whether we're in one of our worst moments like that woman, and we're surrounded by accusers, and we realize he says, you're free. Yeah. You go and sin no more. Yeah. And then, or like, we lost. We had a moment of loss in life. Or whether we had a success and a victory in the wrestling matches of life, that we have a Father who says, I love to watch you play. Yeah. That we have his blessing, in life. And that is, I think that's that place of receiving love. Mm-hmm. And you letting go of the shame. Yeah. His presence.
So good. And just to kind of reiterate something like what you just said, or mirror it back, is like, people think they have to, that like they'll shame the shame off. Mm. And it's like, no, what if you could enter into a conversation where you can love the shame off? Yeah. Like, love the shame off. How powerful of a world would we be living in if that was everybody's strategy? Yes. So yeah. And my favorite wrestling mom would love to hear your take on this conversation.
Oh my goodness. I almost just want to say exclamation point, and there we go. And I might just have to do that, because I was really intently listening to what you were saying, and just like, yes, that is just it's really simply profound. Just the idea of, letting God love the shame off instead of you trying to shame the shame off. So let's just put an exclamation point after that. Yeah,
absolutely. Awesome. Well, this is, such a good conversation. So, as we're wrapping up, I'd love to just kind of freeform and just, for anybody who's listening, like whatever, their doubts are about whether or not they are lovable, worthy, have a place or a relationship with God, let's actually also talk to the skeptics and the cynics, just like I was a year or so ago, of like, again, speaking to this idea of just like, what if you just tried it on? What if you tried on a picture of your life where you X? What do you invite people to try on?
I guess it was Easter. There's this show called The Chosen that came out, and it's the story. It's a picture of Jesus and the disciples. And I don't know, it's new, and you can find it if you Google it. It's called The Chosen. But we binge watched that thing as a family, and we went through those episodes. And I don't know, for the first time in that way, I saw a Jesus who laughed, and a Jesus who slowed down, and a Jesus who spent time listening, and a Jesus who just cared He cared deeply about the backstory of these disciples. And it just put a whole nother, and really it was the scriptures just brought to life in this story. And I binge watched that, and my heart was just captured with wonder again. Sometimes if you drive to work and you drive that same path, the first time you drove, you saw things like the beautiful farm that you passed by, and you saw things like the beautiful house and the sun rising up, but after you drive that path, sometimes in familiarity you lose the eyes for wonder. Mm-hmm. And there was something that happened with watching that again, that my eyes were filled with wonder again. And so I say, whatever your faith tradition was, whatever your background is, I think with wide-eyed wonder and curiosity, whether it's watching something like The Chosen, or whether it's reading through, John, Jesus, one of his best friends, he writes the story of his life. He's like, man, there's so much grace and truth in this guy we've never seen. Let me tell you the story. Whether it's to read that in the New Testament, or whether it's just to begin with a prayer of, God, if you're real. Because I think he'll take you up on it. Yeah. And remember, it's a process, it's a journey, and sometimes it's the simple prayer of God. And there's this prophet Jeremiah in the Old Testament. He says, God says, you'll find me when you seek me with all your heart. Mm-hmm. Like, that's what God wants most. He wants our heart. He's not looking for us. You can't buy your way to God. He's not looking for church attendance, like where he puts little gold stars up on the refrigerator in heaven. He's not looking for, how good you can be. What he wants most is when I think about like my relationship with Rea, like really what I want most is her heart. I want that relationship, and that's what she wants most from me, and that's what God wants. What I want most for my kids. That's the dream for not where they go to college, but that when they get older and they've got grandkids, that they bring them back to the house, to us, and we have that relationship, Absolutely. And that's what the Father, that's what he wants most. So I would just say, big prayer, God, if you're real, can you start showing me? And watch him roll up his sleeves. Yeah, watch your mouth, Suze.
Yeah. So, and that's really like what I started. It was like I suspended my disbelief because there was a lot of it. And I was just like, okay, God, okay, here I am. Yeah. Like, here I am, you know? So, okay. And if they, if you wanted them to try on X, what would that be for you?
Well, this is going to sound sort of, I don't want it to come across as like anything but the truest heart of love, but I would say try on humility, which is hard. It's very hard, but there's a surrender in that, and I know you've mentioned that, you've said that, and so I think that surrender and humility and letting go, and maybe even practically, like literally just finding a quiet moment, a quiet spot, and sitting or standing or kneeling or whatever, and just literally opening your hands. And maybe that act of just like, okay, I'm going to just surrender and come in humility. Maybe that would unlock a door to hope and freedom and peace and all the things. So that would be my encouragement. Yeah.
So good. And, just to kind of stack on that, like one of the things I've learned, and I wouldn't have been able to say this a year ago, is like it takes faith to have faith. Faith is one of those things like you can't see what you can't see. You can't smell it. You can't taste it. You can't put your finger on it. But so for all of us practical, science-based thinkers, which most science-based thinkers pride themselves in being that, it's like, no, you have to have faith to get faith. And faith is just this constant thing. I mean, every time I talk to you guys, I'm like, faith is like the thing I'm working on, because it is like we get so kind of accustomed to using our human mind, and then, opening up to possibility and miracles, which is another kind of subject that I was always like, okay, that sounds a little bit like airy fairy, like granola to me, but like, that's the thing, like the areas of my life, and I'm working on it every day, that I've just surrendered my life over to God and said, God, like, okay, I'm going to just trust that you have a plan and that you are here to prosper me and that you have a promise for me. Because in my mind, and I will play the logic reason card for a minute, it's like, what's the alternative? Like literally the alternative is to go down this like doom and gloom, glass half empty place. And that's where I want to invite everybody into the idea of humility and like, but also responsibility. Like we have a choice for what we look for. And when we seek, we will find whatever we're seeking. And I mean, I didn't know that until I knew it, but it's so true. And so it does take that humility and just giving yourself grace to be able to receive the real grace, and just like also deem yourself worthy of just even seeking, like to give yourself that opportunity. So such an amazing conversation. I feel like we could have like an entire season on this podcast with you guys. So I'm not, committing you to anything, but that was a verbal confirmation. So any last things that you would like to just impart upon this audience, anything that's coming on your heart about self-love, surrender, relationship with self, relationship with body, faith, miracles, hope, anything that's coming on your heart?
Yeah, so the thought that comes to mind is that research has shown that our self-identity comes from what we think the most important person in our life thinks about us. And that's why I would encourage you to just try on, like God being the most important person in your life, because He thinks you are beautiful, and He thinks you are worthy of His love. He thinks you're worthy of the pursuit. He thinks you are strong, and He thinks you're His beloved. Yeah. He thinks you're precious. And so, like, if the way that, and I'm getting a little emotional because I'm talking to you like I would talk to my daughters. And God is and I don't know what your earthly father was like, but God is the perfection of everything you've ever longed for in a father. And so when you think of those kind of words that you've longed to hear from the most important person in your world, I said, try on God being the most important person, because He's even better than what you think He could be. And then that sense of self self-worth and your self-identity, it begins to take shape and form and have substance and be so solid that no matter what gets thrown against it or what presses on it, that it is secure. And that's where that security comes from that we so desperately need. So,
That's good.
So good.
Okay. My mind is swirling. Kevin is a professional speaker, so let's remember that. But no, I would just say, gosh, yes to all the things he said, but the truth of the matter is that we all can be called daughters of the King. And so I would just say, to me, that is just, I don't know, there's just a picture in that is just so beautiful. And as a daughter of the King, the access you have to the treasure and the inheritance and all of that is beyond. It's beyond. It's already available. All you have to do is just like we're using that metaphor of stepping through that door. That's all that has to happen is just a stepping through the door and just saying, yes, I want that. And then I would also just, I was thinking a minute ago when we were talking, this idea, and this is not my idea. I've read it, heard it, but it just settles with me really, really. It just brings a lot of peace when I think about instead of trying to see the beginning, the middle, and the end of whatever, maybe a particular situation or circumstance or even life, just stop and go, okay, I'm just going to step to the next right thing. I'm just going to, I feel something. I feel like this might be something I need to do. So I'm just going to go, okay, what's next? Okay, I'm going to step there. And then I'm going to wait. And then I'm going to step again. And it just takes the pressure off you and you doing it on your own. There's just something about, okay, I'm just going to do the next right thing and I'm going to give 100% to that. And then I'm going to do the next right thing and I'm going to give 100% to that. And you don't even have to worry about getting safely to the shore. It's like in the middle of even maybe tumultuous waves and wind, you know that his presence is with you because he's telling you, okay, this is the next right thing. This is the next right thing. I'm just stepping, I'm just going. And then eventually you will get safely to the shore. So, yeah.
So good. And I just also got reminded of something that you said one of my first times coming to church. And now I might be misquoting it, but you said something along the lines of like, God, I don't know you, but I want to. Yeah. And that was my prayer for a long time. I was just like, I don't know you. I don't even know if this thing is real, but I want to. Because I was just so at the end of my rope of trying to like do it myself and be in this world alone. Even though I was never alone, I just felt alone, So anybody that, is looking for that next step and that next step, that always resonated with me is like, hey, just the knowingness that you don't know. Like, hey, God, I don't know you, but I want to. So grateful you guys are here. Thank you so much. So the best place to, people want to hear you preach, crosspoint.tv. Is that still the best place to find you? Awesome. Well, we will link that in the show notes. We're so grateful that you guys are here to just share your truth and wisdom and love. I really feel like a lot of what's been brought to life on this podcast, like you guys, you don't know it, but you've been just such an instrumental part of my journey. Well, you do know it. I try to tell you as much as I can, but I'm telling you now, again, you have. And so thank you for all that you've done and just being here and bringing this conversation to light. So awesome. All right. See you soon, guys.
Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If you like what you heard and you're interested in breaking out of your own food, body, and diet prison, here's what I want you to do next. Head on over to stresslesseating.com. That's stresslesseating.com and sign up to watch the Stressless Eating webinar, where I'll walk you through the exact 5-step game plan my female clients use to conquer emotional eating, self-sabotage, and finally heal themselves from the restrictive all-or-nothing diet mentality for good, but without obsessing or spending years in therapy to address it. I've laid it all out for you there in 5 easy steps. Remember, healing your relationship with food and your body does not happen by itself. You need expert guidance to make it happen, and we've helped clients all over the world take back their power from the food and find true and lasting freedom while enjoying life and warm chocolate chip cookies along the way. To see if we can help you do the same, head on over to stresslesseating.com. I'm Leanne Ellington, and I'll see you next time.